the state of Israel itself is transforming into something else, a moment in which Zionism is becoming something completely different. And it's becoming, and if it's not stopped, will become an authoritarian apartheid state, violent not only toward Palestinians under its control, but also toward any Jewish citizens who oppose this regime. And in that sense, it's well on the way to becoming a pariah state. It looks like the end game for now is to make it impossible for the population to live in Gaza, to at some point find some mechanism. As Netanyahu said in May, he said, they will have no homes to come back to. Our only problem is to find countries that will take them in. And of course, Israel has not found countries that would take in 2 million Palestinians. But to create a humanitarian disaster that would make it impossible for the people of Gaza to stay there. And then afterwards, Gaza will have been flattened, it will be rebuilt, and it will be rebuilt as Jewish settlements. It is clear that in May of 2024, there was a proposal presented by President Biden at the time, who said that the Prime Minister of Israel had agreed to, and that Hamas had agreed to, which would have meant returning everyone for everyone. That is, that all the hostages would be released, a long list of Palestinian prisoners would be handed back to Gaza, many of whom, by the way, they're called terrorists in Israel, but many of whom in administrative arrest, so they've never even been charged with anything. They're just kept in jail. And that Hamas, hypothetically, the leadership would have left to Libya or wherever. Hamas was willing to reach an agreement, and Netanyahu personally blew it up over and over and over again. Well, Netanyahu knows that if he agrees to any such deal, whatever it might be, to stop the war and return the hostages, which is what the majority of the Israeli public wants, he will lose his coalition partners, his coalition would collapse, he would have to declare elections, and in those elections he might lose. If he loses, then there would be a state commission of inquiry over what happened on October 7th, the fiasco of October 7th. He would be found obviously the major culprit because he was head of state, and his trial for corruption, which has been going on now for 5 years, the judges may finally have the courage to convict him.
Hi, you're watching The Times of India. I'm Aditi Prasad, and with me is Israeli-American historian Omer Bartov. He's a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the Brown University, and he's currently writing on the Holocaust, Europe's eastern borderlands, and, of course, the Israel-Palestine issue. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask a very straight question to you. Since October 2023, over 50,000 Palestinians are dead. Thousands, tens and thousands are injured, and 1.5 million displaced. Not to mention the images that we are seeing of hunger and starvation inside Gaza. My one question to you, as a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, how do you view this brutal onslaught on Palestinians inside Gaza?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Look, as of May of 2024, so several months after the Hamas attack on October 7th and the Israeli onslaught on Gaza, I concluded that this was a genocidal operation, and that the statements that were made by Israeli politicians and generals in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attack, which said things like, we will flatten Gaza, there are no uninvolved people there, they're human animals, we will give them no food, no water, no energy. Those statements were not only made in the heat of the moment following the attack by Hamas that killed about 800 Israeli civilians, but were actually guidelines for the military. And rather than the declared war goals, which were to destroy Hamas and to release the hostages, what the IDF began carrying out, implementing, was a total destruction of Gaza with the goal of making it entirely uninhabitable for its population. That became clear to me in May because then the IDF moved into Rafah, which by then had about half of the population of Gaza concentrated in it, since they'd been displaced multiple times from their homes north of Rafah. Rafah is on the Egyptian border in the southernmost tip of the Gaza Strip. And the IDF moved them out of there again to the Al Mawasi area, to the beach area, and then proceeded to destroy Rafah altogether. And it was at that point that it became clear that what the IDF was doing and continues to do to this day is to attempt to completely destroy Gaza, make it uninhabitable, and subsequently concentrate the population in the south with the goal of removing it altogether from the Gaza Strip.
What's the end game? What is the end game? There was an October 7th. No one can deny that the present war was started by Hamas when they breached Israeli borders on October 7th. Almost 3 years of brutal onslaught after that. What do you see as Netanyahu's end game here?
Well, that is one of the big questions because Netanyahu has refused adamantly to say what the day after would look like. And there are reasons for that. If he were to speak about what the end game is, then he would have to provide an alternative for who would actually control Gaza once this war, which is no longer a war and it hasn't been a war since summer of 2024, who would rule Gaza? Who would be in control? Now, Hamas can't be in control, so Hamas would have to be removed, the Hamas leadership. But who then would take over? The Israeli army can't take over. It would be way too costly in blood and treasure. So the only natural alternative to Hamas is the Palestinian Authority. That is, the Palestinians would rule themselves. That would create a connection between Gaza and the West Bank and begin a political process. That's exactly what Netanyahu and his government do not want. And so he is in a conundrum. Until the war, Netanyahu was actually or made the argument to his own people that Hamas was not simply an enemy, but also an asset. Because as long as Hamas ruled
Right.
Gaza, Netanyahu could say, well, there's nobody to speak with. And therefore, we can manage the occupation. That blew up on October 7th. So it looks like the end game for now is to make it impossible for the population to live in Gaza, to at some point find some mechanism. As Netanyahu said in May, he said, they will have no homes to come back to. Our only problem is to find countries that will take them in. And of course, Israel has not found countries that would take in 2 million Palestinians. But to create a humanitarian disaster that would make it impossible for the people of Gaza to stay there. And then afterwards, Gaza will have been flattened, it will be rebuilt, and it will be rebuilt as Jewish settlements.
Is that what you see standing from where we are looking at things today? What is actually happening today?
Well, what is happening today is that on a daily basis, hundreds of Palestinians are being killed by Israeli air raids, tanks, and even when they go to get food, they're getting shot because the IDF is using tactics of crowd control with live fire. So that is what is happening today. I don't think, but it's hard to say, I don't think that Israel can accomplish what it wants to do, both because of external pressures that will not make it possible in the long run, but also because the IDF itself keeps saying that it's not being given any clear instructions as to what to do. It's wandering around Gaza. All it is doing is demolishing houses. Every once in a while, some guerrilla group shoots an anti-tank missile or something like that. But by and large, the IDF is not fighting a war. It's engaged in demolition. But morale in the Israeli army has greatly been diminished. The number of troops available is diminishing. There have been more and more cases of suicide. the chief of staff is clearly opposed to taking over all of Gaza. That has been repeatedly leaked. And there is a constitutional crisis in Israel in any case, because the government has fired the attorney general, which the Supreme Court has said is an illegal act. And so it's not only that Israel is undecided and doesn't know what to do next in Gaza, but also that there's a constitutional crisis and erosion of democracy in Israel itself.
Right. So do you believe this to be the continued war in Gaza? Because there are ample opportunities to come to a ceasefire agreement. Hamas says that Israel is not serious about the ceasefire. They're not coming on the table and agreeing to the terms. Israel, of course, blames Hamas. Trump, the U.S. administration blames Hamas for not coming on the table and not agreeing to a ceasefire. When you look at it, I'm sure you've studied what's happening. Who do you think is to blame here?
Well, I mean, blame, can go around, but it is clear that in May of 2024, there was a proposal presented by President Biden at the time, who said that the Prime Minister of Israel had agreed to, and that Hamas had agreed to, which would have meant returning everyone for everyone. That is, that all the hostages would be released. A long list of Palestinian prisoners would be handed back to Gaza, many of whom, by the way, they're called terrorists in Israel, but many of whom in administrative arrest, so they've never even been charged with anything. They're just kept in jail. And that Hamas, hypothetically, the leadership would have left to Libya or wherever, and someone else would take over the Gaza Strip. Temporarily, there would be, probably Arab soldiers there from other countries, from Egypt or from Saudi Arabia, and then gradually the place would be rebuilt, and there would be a Palestinian administration of Gaza. That was on the table in May last year. It went on the table again in January. This was the plan. There were several phases. Phase one, return of some hostages. And then when phase two came close, Netanyahu blew it up. And in March this year, Israel unilaterally broke the ceasefire and continued implementing the original plan, which is to remove the population from where it lives and cram it to the south, concentrate it in what appears to be would be a vast concentration camp on the ruins of Rafah, and prepare it for deportation. So, yes, Hamas, which is not a nice organization, and I would not condone anything of what it did, and I don't think it did much good to the Palestinians in Gaza either, but Hamas was willing to reach an agreement, and Netanyahu personally blew it up over and over and over again.
I come back to my question again because I feel to what are the compulsions that are driving Netanyahu for prolonging this war, despite, as you pointed out, new enemies cropping up every day to the Jewish state. Even the G7 nations, Canada, France, UK, they are also frustrated and angry, and they're not talking about a two-state solution and recognizing Palestine's statehood. Why is Netanyahu not able to see the writing on the wall?
Well, I mean, there are two explanations to this. One is more short term and political, and the other is deeper and ideological. The first one is that most people in Israel would say, well, Netanyahu knows that if he agrees to any such deal, whatever it might be, to stop the war and return the hostages, which is what the majority of the Israeli public wants, he will lose his coalition partners. His coalition would collapse. He would have to declare elections. And in those elections, he might lose. If he loses, then there would be a state commission of inquiry over what happened on October 7th, the fiasco of October 7th. He would be found, obviously, the major culprit because he was head of state. And his trial for corruption, which has been going on now for 5 years, the judges may finally have the courage to convict him. So he cannot afford to lose his coalition. He has to stay in power. That's the sort of political explanation, and I think it's true, but I don't think it's all of it. Netanyahu has been adamantly always against the Palestinian state. And he tried to manage this by saying, look, we can manage the situation. And in large part, he agreed. He succeeded to the extent that in Israel, the last few election campaigns before the last one in 2022, when he formed this very far right government, the occupation never came up. It was not an issue. And you will recall that the international community kind of forgot about the Palestinians. No one really cared about them anymore. It wasn't an issue at all. And in fact, Israel and Saudi Arabia and the US were talking about creating some kind of agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, actually opening trade routes to India, and everything seemed wonderful, apart from the fact that nobody spoke about the Palestinians. And Hamas, seeing that, obviously chose to act when it did because he was afraid that an agreement with Saudi Arabia and the United States and Israel would finally sweep them completely under the rug. And so for Netanyahu, there's an ideological aspect to this. He cannot agree to anything that would facilitate some kind of sharing of the space between the 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians who live in the territory between the river and the sea.
Beyond this, the ideological and the personal political reasons, there is also, as I asked you, the growing anger across the world. As I said, UK has changed its decades old policy, talking about recognizing the Palestinian state. There's France, there's Canada, more nations are joining in.
Um, the truth of the matter is that those states that are now speaking about maybe in September recognizing a Palestinian state
Hmm.
are states that talked about a two-state solution long ago. This is not something new. And then they gradually started shifting away from that. And so for a long time, as I said, Britain, Germany, France, the US, Canada were sort of buying the Israeli line.
Hmm.
Now that you see this catastrophe happening in Gaza and under pressure of their own publics, because public opinion in the world has
Yeah.
changed and it's not so reflected in the political elites, they have to respond to this public pressure. So that's one thing that we have to understand. The second thing is, yes, there are obviously people in Israel who are quite well aware of that. Also, people who feel the personal consequences that when they go to Europe, people don't want to serve them, don't want to let Israeli cruise ships come into harbors because of anger as to what Israel is doing. But the people at the top right now are very extreme. And for them, the fact that the entire world is well, parts of the world, I would say, but important parts for Israel, protesting against Israeli actions only radicalizes them more because the whole logic of people like that is the entire world is against us.
Hmm.
We always knew it, and we now have the opportunity. And one has to understand that the far right in Israel, but including Netanyahu, after it recovered from the shock of October 7th, started thinking of it as an opportunity to finally accomplish what they want to accomplish. And I think they believe that if they can do that, then eventually the world will get used to it. We just have to do it now as forcefully and quickly as we can. One of the ministers there, Ben Gvir, says repeatedly, as he said just yesterday, we have to concentrate the population in the south and then encourage them to migrate. And encourage by not giving them food, not giving them water, and bombing them so that they will be persuaded to leave. So about 30% of the population in Israel supports that, but that 30% is heavily represented in the current cabinet, and there's no uh, potent opposition. The opposition in Israel has been very weak, has not been able to present any alternative, is repeatedly hounded by the government, is afraid of its own public. So the only way that Israeli policy will change will be not because of declarations that in September there might be a recognition of a Palestinian state, which on itself is an empty declaration. There is no state, and it won't
Yeah.
happen because Macron says it would, but rather immediate direct pressure on Israel, economic pressure and pressure by limiting the arming of Israel. The U.S. and Germany are providing Israel with huge amounts of munitions on a daily basis. If that were to be limited, then things would change quite quickly on the ground.
How about Trump's role in this thing? Trump getting re-elected and coming to power for his second term. How has that emboldened Netanyahu's Gaza plan?
Well, I mean, it did two things, partly because we don't know what Trump's policy is. Um, we don't know what decision he will make at any moment. So, two clear things happened. Just before Trump came into office, he actually forced Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire that began in January. And that ceasefire facilitated bringing food to Gaza in large amounts and releasing large numbers of hostages. And that was a good thing. And Netanyahu, who might have
Right.
resisted President Biden, accepted that from Trump because he's more, afraid of Trump. But then when Netanyahu went to Washington and met Trump, then Trump said publicly, he said, well, we have to remove the people of Gaza from Gaza for a while at least, because we have to rebuild the place. And then we can rebuild it as a beautiful resort area. It's a wonderful beach there. Uh, Now, he later sort of forgot about that statement, but in Israel, that statement was endorsed across the board. Yes, now we have license from the United States to remove the Palestinians from Gaza, flatten it, rebuild it, of course, with Arab money, not with Israeli money or American money, and then, of course, not build hotels and resorts in the Trump style, but build Jewish settlements there. So he is playing on both sides. And when Israel broke the ceasefire, the U.S. did nothing. Now he has expressed anxiety. He saw the pictures coming from Gaza on TV. They're not shown that much, but they were shown a little bit on Fox TV, and that's what he watches. And so he said, oh, that's terrible. And Melania thinks it's also terrible. So we have to do something about it. But nothing was done. And right now, Israel has a carte blanche, as far as we know, from Trump. And as long as he does, it will continue doing what it's doing. If he changes his mind tomorrow, everybody knows that in Israel. The U.S. can stop Israel within 2 weeks, but it hasn't done so. And maybe he will, and maybe he won't. I don't know that he knows at the moment, but we can, hope for it.
Israel stands accused of genocide and is actually on trial for genocide in the highest court of the world. How do you view this?
Well, I mean, many people in Israel and many supporters of Israel say, how can you accuse Israel of genocide, a country that was created in the wake of the Holocaust, the greatest genocide of the modern era? That's a scandal to accuse Israel of genocide. And I agree that it's a scandal. I just think that the scandal is not that you call the thing by its name, but that this country, a country that was created in 1948, the same year that the Genocide Convention was endorsed by the UN, that country is engaging now in a genocidal operation in Gaza. That is heartbreaking to see that happening. And as I said before, it is, of course, first of all, uh, an enormous tragedy for Palestinians. And the numbers are extremely high. They're even higher than what you quoted. There are, the estimates of at least 100,000 people who've died,
Yeah.
and 200,000 who were wounded, and 70% of the houses destroyed, and so forth. Um, but it's also a moment in which the state of Israel itself is transforming into something else, a moment in which Zionism is becoming something completely different. And it's becoming, and if it's not stopped, will become an authoritarian apartheid state, violent not only toward Palestinians under its control, but also toward any Jewish citizens who oppose this regime. And in that sense, it's well on the way to becoming a pariah state. And I think that it's an incredible historical irony and tragedy that a country that was created on the ashes of the Holocaust has now led itself into this dark hole of killing deliberately tens of thousands of people and transforming itself into an apartheid state.